When most people hear AI, what they picture is a chatbot. They picture ChatGPT or Gemini or maybe Copilot, something that you type into that answers back like a person. And that's not wrong, it's just not the whole picture. Because these tools are the front door to a much larger industry, they're the most visible layer of this whole ecosystem of models, companies, and strategies that are rapidly evolving and competing at an insane pace. My purpose of this infographic is to try to give you a feel for the picture of what's going on nationally or actually internationally in the world of AI. The goal is not to cover every single model, but the goal is to cover a few models, put them in perspective on why you would use these types of models, and also give you some vocabulary terms that help you keep track and understand what's going on in the AI industry. What we're going to do is we're going to go through this. First, let's go over some terms. There's three different model categories that we're going to be looking at. This is sort of a taxonomy of models. There's the frontier proprietary models that we have in this upper right quadrant. This is what you know: ChatGPT, Gemini 3, Claude 4.5, Grok, Copilot. There's others, but these are the big players. And then we're going to look at open weight models. We'll talk more about what these are in a second. And then there's some specialized models that are open weights. And then there's some proprietary models that are not open weights and more focused on specific applications. Let's go over those terms and then come back and talk about the models. First of all, you hear me say in class a lot LLMs, large language models, because I'm trying to be inclusive of all the different things that are going on in the AI industry. What you need to know is that AI models are trained on a massive amount of text, basically the whole internet, to understand and generate human like language. Open weights, it turns out the model parameters can be trained and you can share those, share the models that you use and how you construct that, and let other people actually run your models and even examine those models and see how they're designed. Open weights has a lot of interest because sometimes you don't want to send your proprietary data up to the cloud where the proprietary models do the processing. You want to compute and process, do inference locally on your own computers. Proprietary, that just means that you can only access the models through the website or the APIs. We'll talk about what an API is in a second. The model itself stays on the servers. You can see why companies that have sensitive data might want to control that process or maybe even run something locally on their own. Context window, that's what we've talked about in class about how you need to manage the context window to try to get the best responses coming out of an LLM. Parameters, if you go back and you look at the three blue, one brown video on how LLMs work, he has some interesting graphics that show visual effects of lots of different tuning knobs. And some of these models have close to 1 trillion parameters. They're very hard and expensive to train. Training is the next step in the process. It takes big data centers and it costs millions and millions of dollars to train a given model to make it be responsive like we're used to seeing coming out of the proprietary frontier models. Okay, and there's a term that's called inference. That means, okay, the model is up and running and people are going to use it. Again, you need data centers set up because the prompts that you use require lots of computation. You go send your prompt into ChatGPT, it goes up to the cloud, all the compute happens, and then it comes back as an answer to you. This requires a lot of computational power. That's why we're building out data centers everywhere. The other thing that's going on in the background is there are a lot of different applications that have AI built into it. For example, you've heard me talk about 3D printing. If you go to Fusion 360, there's some AI built into how you run that software. It will give you hints and help you do different design methods. And, it probably is making an API call, or it could be making an API call to understand exactly how that intelligence should be inserted into the application. You'll hear talk about the cost of APIs because that's what software developers use. And if they want to have a very performance driven system, they want to use a good model, but the good models are more expensive. So there's this trade off that designers have to have. And how much intelligence does my application need? And maybe I could get by with a cheaper model. All those things are important. API access is typically charged by the token. We've talked about what tokens are. And you can see why that business model is important going on in the background. It's not just people using ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok and Copilot. It's developers that are injecting intelligence into business systems and applications and all the kind of things that we are using and seeing come onto the horizon these days. Okay, what I want you to do is I'm going to give you access to this graphic. You can poke around and look at the different descriptions of the models, like GPT 5.2 from ChatGPT. That's a really good model. Then you can click over here to Gemini 3. Gemini 3 is another one that I use a lot. My favorite model these days is Claude 4.5. And it tells you a little bit about the different models. But then you can look over here. This is an interesting space as well. You may not remember, but last year around this time, there's a Chinese model that got released called DeepSeek. And there's apps in the App Store, and it was very fun to use because it was one of the first reasoning models that actually showed you how it was reasoning, but seemed so much more interesting to watch and fun to use compared to ChatGPT, which had some reasoning models that were quite good at the time. They just didn't expose those to the public, and it actually put some pressure on OpenAI to release and to make available reasoning models to the public. DeepSeek's an important one, but it's open source, open weights, and you can actually, if you have enough computing power, you can run these kind of models. Another one that's popular these days is Qwen 3. It's another Chinese model, but it's very performant. And you can actually get small enough versions of these models that you can put onto your own computing hardware. I have a version of Qwen 3 running on a little Mac Mini that I bought, and it's kind of fun to play around with. Llama 4, this is from Meta. Meta's got a big presence in AI. A lot of their profits these days are being driven by AI coordinated ads and features of AI that help drive people to stay on social media. And so, an interesting model to look at as well. There's other more specialized things that are open weights. This is from Mistral, AI company in France. And then this Phi 4, this is Microsoft's small language model. It's interesting that, it's funny to say just 3.5 billion parameters. 3.5 billion seems like such a massive number, but it's small in the AI space. It's small enough that you could actually run things on a phone. You can see why that would be useful if you can inject intelligence where you don't have to pay for API charges and you do things on your phone. That would be a very interesting use case. So click around here, try to go back to this overview and think about the terms because it helps you when you see news articles about what's going on in AI to understand what they're talking about with training and parameters and context windows and whether they're open source or open weights. All those things help you stay informed and can help drive your career in terms of keeping up with what's going on with AI.